My guest today is Ralph Pezzullo.
I'm the author of a recent book called Stolen Elections, The Takedown of Democracies Worldwide. And it's based on a 5-year investigation by two top government whistleblowers. Gary Bernson, who is a very distinguished CIA operations officer. He's the man who was recruited to go into Afghanistan after 9/11 and put together combined CIA and special forces teams. And they ended up overthrowing the Taliban with the help of U.S. airstrikes within 3 weeks, and then had Osama bin Laden trapped in Tora Bora. But the Pentagon declined to send in Rangers to block their escape into Pakistan. The other gentleman is named Martin Rodil, and he's probably the top DEA source/consultant that they've ever had. He's an expert in especially Latin American transnational crime, and he is of Venezuelan birth, and is sort of the one who discovered the Cartel del Soles, which is run by the Venezuelan regime.
Okay, and I've read your book. I think it's just fascinating. I see you've been getting a lot of publicity. You've been on some big podcasts talking about this. It's been out a few months now, right?
It came out, I think, the 1st of September, the first week of September. Yes.
Okay. And then Donald Trump knows about this now, right? He understands what's happening here, and Musk as well?
Yes. So Donald Trump has been briefed. Elon Musk saw the presentation in, at least a year ago, maybe before that. And he checked out all the discoveries, because what these gentlemen did is they recruited a lot of engineers from the criminal cartel, the men who created the software and still have copies of the source code. And he was able to go through it with his engineers and check out everything for President Trump and verify that, yes, this is the system and this is how it works. And all the information that they uncovered has been investigated by the FBI and the Justice Department and verified. And there are several sources who are former members of the Venezuelan cartel who are now in custody, who have verified that this is all true. So this is real. And the Trump administration and especially the Justice Department are in the process of, they've already subpoenaed people, and they're in the process of issuing indictments. The first indictments came out, I think, 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and they involved the Tren de la Agua, which is a part of this whole conspiracy. I'm hopeful that it will be exposed. But I think the election stealing software will be disabled in some form. I don't know exactly. I've heard various rumors of what it's going to be, but I don't know for sure. But I think it's going to take a long time to take down the cartel. Because there's a criminal cartel that's behind all this, and this criminal cartel includes Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran, and they've been stealing our elections since 2008. So they're very deeply entrenched. They have paid off. They have a lot of money. Venezuela is one of the richest countries in the world. It has the highest oil reserves of any country in the world. And also they control, it's a criminal government. So they run a criminal cartel which I referred to before, called the Cartel de los Soles. And basically they're a government of drug dealers, and they control all the drug traffic in the Western Hemisphere and a lot of drug traffic to Europe and the Middle East. So just the Cartel del Solis part of the regime uh, makes something like somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion a year. So they have tremendous resources, and they're committed with their criminal partners who are enemies of the United States to destabilize and the United States from within using election software, uh, uh, terrorist groups like Tren de Aragua, and other sort of unrestricted warfare techniques.
And it's not just U.S. elections, right? It's thousands of elections around the world.
Yes,
72 countries use this software, correct?
that's right. So at this point, the software spread from, it was created in Venezuela in 2004, when Hugo Chavez, who was the president of Venezuela, was facing a referendum. And he was very closely tied to Fidel Castro in Cuba. Fidel Castro was sort of his father figure. And Fidel Castro told him at that time, Hugo, you're going to lose the referendum unless you do something. And Hugo Chavez was, well, what do I do? And Fidel Castro and his intelligence service suggested that they used what was considered very new at that time, which was to develop electronic voting machines loaded with software that was designed to steal elections. So Hugo Chavez hired 3 Venezuelan engineers, very expert computer engineers. They already had a company that did like touchscreen banking, and he asked them if they could develop a software that would accomplish the goal. And they went out and they created a software. There were no such thing as electronic voting machines at the time, so they bought Olivetti touchscreen banking machines from Italy, and they loaded the software into these machines, and they used those machines for the 2004 referendum in Venezuela, and were able to manipulate the results so that Hugo Chavez won. He and Fidel Castro were extremely pleased, and Hugo Chavez rewarded them $200 million and said, can you develop this software further, and let's try it in elections in Latin America. We'll try to win contracts in Latin America. And in the early 2000s, there were a series of elections where, to the surprise of many and against many polls, leftists won elections in Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and for Fidel Castro, this was a dream come true, because he had spent his whole career basically trying to foment a socialist revolution in countries in Latin America. If you remember, there were lots of guerrilla movements in the 70s and 80s in Latin America that tried to accomplish this goal. And now he was able to do it with election machines, and nobody was catching on to what they were doing, but they were flipping governments to the left. And then in around 2006, they decided to try in the United States. And the same 3 engineers, they established a company in the United States called Smartmatic. It was incorporated in Delaware, and they started trying to win contracts. They disguised, throughout this whole process, that there was a lot of corporate shell game going on, and they were always trying to hide the Venezuelan ownership of the software. And the first contract that they won was for Cook County, Illinois, for the 2008 presidential primary. It pitted Barack Obama, Senator Obama, against Senator Hillary Clinton. Well, Hillary Clinton at the time was much better known than Barack Obama. Obviously, she'd been the first lady, and she had been a senator two-term senator from New York State, and she was expected to win the primary handily. Well, the engineers from Smartmatic, they went to work and they were able to steal that primary for Barack Obama. And we have Hugo Chavez's former head of security is now a friend of ours. And he told us that Hugo Chavez said back in 2008, he said, watch me, I'm going to elect the first African-American president of the United States. And he was able to do that. And since 2008, they have been using this software to steal every election in the United States. Over time, they were able to, what happened was that in 2007 or early on, a congressman, Congressman Carolyn Mahoney from New York State, from New York, she went to the Treasury Department and she said, I'm suspicious of this software. It seems to me that there's a lot of Venezuelan ownership involved. And the Treasury Department launched an investigation and they found out that her accusations were true. Because of that, Smartmatic bought another company called Sequoia, and they applied to run elections in California. Well, California did an audit of Sequoia, and they found it was the same software with the same source code, and so basically they sold. It was a whole like corporate shenanigans. They sold Sequoia to another company, a Canadian company called Dominion. But all along, they kept, once the software had been inserted into these machines, it was never changed. And so they were just able to sort of hide their corporate ownership by selling it to these different companies. And they made an arrangement whereby Dominion would run all elections in the United States, with the exception of Los Angeles County, which would still be run by Smartmatic. And then they would start to market Smartmatic to other countries around the world. At this point, as far as we know, they run elections in about 72 countries in the world using Smartmatic voting machines. And the terrible thing about this is that when Donald Trump was first elected and he brought on Elon Musk to run Doge, which was to streamline government efficiency. One of the first departments that Doge looked at, when they looked at the budget of USAID, and they found that USAID was giving billions of dollars to an organization called CEPS. Now, CEPS, which probably I had never heard of before, they're called the Consortium of Elections and Political Process Strengthening. And what they were doing was they were basically operating as the marketing arm of Smartmatic. So U.S. embassies, and we have evidence of this, and we have recruited a bunch of people who I'm actually writing another book that will get into all of that. But the embassies around the world, U.S. embassies, were basically pressuring countries to adapt this software. And this raises the question of, well, wait a minute, who is behind this in our government? And it appears as though it was the CIA, our intelligence service. So they saw this as a way to control elections overseas. And they started working with basically our enemies, who are Venezuela, China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba. And they have been engaged with the United States in what they call unrestricted warfare. So that's a way of trying to undermine the United States, to undermine democracies all over the world, and spread their sort of one world socialist agenda. And that's what is going on now. And we see evidence of it um, in a lot of areas. Part of what they sent across the border were thousands of trained disruptors, uh, members of a gang called Tren de la Ragua, that were all people who had been in prison in Venezuela for crimes, that were trained and then sent across the border during the Biden administration when the border was open, to set up in communities all across the United States to just cause problem, disrupt, commit crimes, do drug dealing, and so on. So this was another aspect of this whole operation that these two whistleblowers brought to the attention of the Trump administration. So they gave them the names of they had gathered the names of more than 20,000 Tren de la Ragua members, and they handed them over to the Trump administration. And since last January, they've been trying to find these people and arrest them. Part of what Homeland what ICE is doing today. The other thing is that the Venezuelans and the Chinese have put a lot of money into organizations like the Open Society Foundation, run by George Soros and his son, and other groups that are socialist in nature and interested in undermining the United States. And we see evidence of that, all over the place. And for example, now in Minnesota. So a lot of these demonstrators, a lot of these movements, including Black Lives Matter, the trans movement, they're not organic. They have been funded by our foreign enemies. And so, that's sort of where we are now. The question becomes, what's going to happen? And that is up to the Trump administration. One of the reasons that he went in to Venezuela and took out Maduro and his wife, and who are now in U.S. prison, is because of the information that was provided by these two whistleblowers. So it's beyond just drug dealing. They need to take down the Cartel del Soles, but the reason the Trump administration acted the way they did had to do more with a lot of these other activities.
So I'm curious if there were maybe hundreds of people in Venezuela working on election cheating, if somehow we could shut that down, how much effect would that have? Or could the election cheating just continue here without them even being involved just as much?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know for sure. The engine, when they plan to steal the presidential election, for example, because what happened was these two whistleblowers, Gary and Martine, one of the things they did in order to prove a criminal conspiracy is that they recruited 18 engineers and statisticians from within Smartmatic and the Venezuelan Consejo Nacional Electoral, where they run all of this election manipulation. And these engineers have told us that this is a very, very sophisticated operation that involves hundreds of engineers, and they plan the steal of an election a year ahead of time. So, for example, when Dominion wins the contract to run an election district, we have something like 300 election districts in the United States. They take over what are called the poll books. So they have all the data on all the history of all the voters in that district. So they know who voted in the last election, who doesn't vote, who has died and is still on the rolls, and they can use that information to kind of plan how their plan of attack. Are we going to use? It explains why for example, in 2000, in some areas like in Philadelphia, there were more people who voted than were actual registered voters. they were able to, to use the poll books to identify people who hadn't voted and vote for them, in other words. And this system it's designed with 14 back doors into it. So they can go district by district, and in order to swing an election a presidential election, there are about 12 to 14 key voting districts. All they have to do is flip those from one side to the other, and they plan that ahead of time, and they plan it so that they can't get caught. So that there's no clear pattern, and the tabulation for the votes through the voting machines, because the voting machines are just one way that they do this. The tabulation for the voting machines is all done through servers. These machines are connected to servers that are in Belgrade, Serbia, and run by the Chinese. They're Huawei servers. They're huge. And then the results are beamed back to the machines, and it's all done through virtual, VPN tunnels, they call them, and there's no way to track it, because the apparatus is all virtual, and they just destroy it once they make their tabulation, and what they send back is just the final tabulation. So when you do an audit, all you're seeing is the final tabulation, and there's nothing else behind it. They're very sophisticated. The best way to disrupt this system, according to Elon Musk and other experts, is to get rid of it completely. They contend that, I'm not a computer expert, but they contend that there's no system, computer system, that is completely safe. So you have to get rid of the use of computers in elections, and go back to paper ballots with IDs. That, from what I understand, is what the Trump administration is planning to enact.
And is that done in some countries already? Paper ballots with IDs and hand counting of everything, right? I think that's what should be done.
Yes.
Because like you said, with at least 14 different ways to cheat and stuff going over the internet. And again, there's this idea that everything is air gapped, and don't worry your pretty little head about anybody hacking, because there's no way to get there from the internet. But I think you mentioned there's lots of ways, not just Wi-Fi, but satellites and other ways for them to get in.
Absolutely.
And even if there was no virtual way to get in, do you see a problem with people bringing in USB drives or just hand carrying stuff in as well?
Sure. There's some, we have been very lax in the security of our elections. I mean, here we have elections that are run by with Venezuelan software. The machines the parts are made in China, of all the voting machines. They're made in China. They're shipped to Taiwan. They slap on made in Taiwan, assembled in Taiwan, but they're designed and made in China. And so, here we have our elections run by, two countries who are basically our enemies. So how did we let that happen? The answer is that there's been a lot of collusion in the United States, within election officials and different counties and judges, and all the way up to the White House. This cartel has a lot of power, and they have infiltrated our government, and they're still holding on and trying to continue their hold on the government. So even within the White House, there's a battle in terms of how far they're going to go in Venezuela, and that they're constantly trying to people are trying to stymie what the president has articulated as his goal, which is to clean up all elections.
So how widespread do you think this knowledge is of all the crooked ways to attack elections among politicians? Do you think most of them are just sitting back and trusting that You know, even if the stuff was made in China or the software was made in Venezuela, it's probably all been checked out and we shouldn't worry about it. Do you think that is what a lot of people are thinking, or do they know?
I don't know. All I can tell you is that when the whistleblowers, before I was ever involved, and when they first completed their criminal investigation, they started to breach members of Congress. That's where they first went, and they got an extremely chilly reception. A lot of congressmen didn't want to hear it. They didn't understand the technical complexity of the system, and they were not interested. The FBI, when they went to the FBI, they were told to basically bury this information and leave the country, or they're going to be arrested. So there was clearly a lot of collusion within our government. And so that's one of the things that the current administration is trying to overcome, and to get people, to get this information out, and to make people aware of what the danger is, and what we have been living with.
It does seem to me that as the cat gets out of the bag and more people, just ordinary people and people on podcasts, et cetera, understand what's happening, that they won't be able to continue this. It seems like it has to crumble to me.
I think you're right. I think so. I think we're about 60% there, like 50 to 60% there. But the more we put the word out and the more people examine the evidence, I think they will come to the same conclusion that, that's why I'm continually doing podcasts to spread the word and let people know. I mean, this is not a Republican or Democratic problem. This is an attack on our democracy, on both parties, on the whole system. And, unfortunately, the mainstream media is, not taking up, avoiding this issue for whatever reasons.
Do you want to talk about what happened that allowed Trump to win in 2016 and in 24? Like, I think in 2016, maybe the bad guys were surprised by the size of the vote for Trump. And maybe in 24, there was a Serbian connection that you mentioned. Go ahead.
Okay, so in 2016, it's unclear whether or not they stole the election for Trump, thinking that Trump would be more easy to work with than Hillary Clinton, because he was not, he was not that aware of Venezuelan, of foreign affairs and politics in Venezuela, or whether or not the size of the sort of surge at the end was too large to overcome. When you talk to the engineers, they debate that same thing. But in 2024, what happened was that some white hat whistleblowers, who are friends of ours, were able to shut down, were able to block the servers in Belgrade and allow. They were trying to steal the election for Kamala Harris, and they were able to block that.
And then I think you've mentioned that the good guys have the source code. They have all of it and are able to reproduce stuff in a lab. And Patrick Byrne has been a hero kind of in helping out, right? In reproducing what's going on.
Patrick Byrne so when these whistleblowers started, they started back in like around 2000 and maybe 16. They started looking into this because they were really investigating the Cartel del Soles and the proceeds of drug trafficking. And as they penetrated that criminal organization, they recruited sources, and some of the sources came to them and said, "Hey, we can tell you about the election system too." And they were not really paying attention until after the 2020 election. And they realized, like a lot of us did, that there were some big anomalies in that election, and they started to look into it, and they started to recruit engineers from inside who had worked and put together the source code for the Venezuelans. And yes, they have the source code. At that point, they needed money, and they went. And Patrick Byrne was very generous, and he helped them because they had to keep these engineers hidden and alive. And they also needed to create a computer lab where they could kind of recreate the steals of various different elections. And Patrick Byrne put up the money for that.
So do you think almost all of the cheating is done under one big umbrella, or are there a number of different parties that are not working together at all and they're all cheating? Or like the mail-in ballots, or thousands of uncreased mail-in ballots? Could that be a completely separate thing too?
No, it's all run by them. Yeah, so that's one of the 14 different avenues that they use to steal elections. So it's all very deliberate. So even with the mail-in ballots and allowing so many people across the border with no check, this is all part of the system, because in a lot of states, what they do is these people, illegal immigrants, are given driver's licenses. And when they register for a license in a state, they're immediately put on the voter logs. Then somebody else, it doesn't even have to be them, sends in a mail-in ballot by, Mr. X. They check the voter logs, and there's Mr. X is on the log, and they accept the mail-in ballot. And they know, these criminals, they know all the vulnerabilities in our system. And they know how to manipulate them and avoid detection. And that's what they do. So like I said before, this is a very sophisticated operation. It involves hundreds of engineers from China, from Iran, from Cuba, from Venezuela. They know what they're doing, and that they've been perfecting the system for 18 years while we've been asleep, basically.
So I'm just starting to read about this SAVE Act. That stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. There's a guy named Scott Pressler that's talking about this a lot. Do you think that could make a huge difference in U.S. elections? And why would any politician say, no, we don't want to do this? Is it just because you want to cheat, or why would you not want to make this more?
That's a good question.
Button it down, yeah.
That's a good question. There are a lot of people invested in keeping the system the same, keeping the system in and one evidence of that is the billions of dollars that have gone into marketing Smartmatic all over the world. I think it will be probably easy to, relatively easy to disrupt the system and get rid of the electronic voting machines. But it'll probably take decades to root out all the corruption and all the collusion that has taken place, because it's very deep. It goes all the way from the top of our government into district voting officials. So there's lots of people have been corrupted along the way. In fact, there are Venezuelans who are members of the cartel who are election officials in the United States. That's how far they have penetrated our system.
Is it true that there was no electronic voting even in the U.S. until around 2008 or so, or they had mechanical voting maybe in 2000 where they had the hanging chads? That was mechanical, not electronic, or?
Yeah, they had different kinds of machines, but they were not the kind of machines that could be connected to a server that could be. They weren't as sophisticated as they are today, where this manipulation can go undetected the way it is today. Before, there was always some sort of physical, like the chads, the die-ball machines and so on, where there was a like physical evidence that could be recounted and so on.
And are there other competing voter machines in the U.S. that don't use any Venezuelan software?
It's hard to tell. I mean, most of all the big companies use the same, have been infected with the same software. So there are other voting companies that Dominion controls all of the like 60% of all the key voting districts in the United States. But there are other companies, and those companies we suspect are also using the same software or a variation of the same software.
Do you have opinions on what's going on in these three countries, voting-wise, the UK, Canada, and Australia? Any special opinions there, or are they even in the 72?
Well, yeah, the UK is Canada, yeah, and they're all three of them are using Smartmatic voting machines. Or I'm not exactly sure, but they're all those countries. The votes are being manipulated. Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you think that people might end up going to jail in the next, during this term for Trump? He'll send some people to jail for voting fraud?
Yes. Yeah, I can tell you that there are indictments, or some Smartmatic officials have already been indicted. Tren de la Ragua members have already been indicted. The Justice Department has a big task force that is devoted just to this issue, to this area, and there are more indictments coming. Yes.
And then one thing I've heard you stress is that there was massive cheating in November 2020, and there just wasn't enough time to do all this investigation and figure it out by January of the next year. It was 3 months or less.
That's
But
right.
you spent years, or people have spent years digging in and interviewing witnesses, and it took this long to really expose what's happening, right?
That's right. So in 2000, when the election happened, Gary and Martine were just getting started with their investigation. They already knew that the Venezuelans were behind some of the election fraud in our country, but they couldn't prove it. The Trump campaign found out about their investigation, and they spoke to Sidney Powell and Rudolph Giuliani, who were Trump's lawyer and campaign manager, respectively. And they basically told them, like, look, we're just starting to invest to gather the information, but we think that this is what's been going on. This was how the election was stolen. But please don't announce it at this time, because we don't have the evidence to prove it in court. They were under so much pressure between the November of 2000 to inauguration in January, that they came out and said, we have the Kraken. Well, the Kraken was this, but the two whistleblowers, Gary and Martine, were kind of horrified because they knew they couldn't prove it at the time. And that's exactly what happened. So Sidney Powell and Rudolph Giuliani were called to present their evidence. They didn't have the evidence yet. That they had, some evidence from certain counties and voting districts, but they couldn't prove the complete criminal conspiracy. And it was unfortunate. And also, so it became, it became almost like a joke in the press that, they thought that there was election fraud, and they were proven incorrect. Well, they were correct. They just didn't have the evidence. And it took the whistleblowers from that point about 3.5 years before they had what they considered a watertight criminal case.
So I think quite a few people will watch podcasts like this, and they'll say, "Oh, where's your evidence? I don't see the evidence here." But you can't provide it all in an hour here. But your book is 378 pages long, and there's enormous amounts of facts and names and details in there. And also at stolenelectionfacts.com, right? Your website has tons of detail. So people that say that are going to have to dig in further, because you're not going to, in 1 hour, you're not going to be able to put it all out there.
No, I'm not. Look, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just saying, hey, I've looked at this evidence. Elon Musk has looked at this evidence. The FBI, the Justice Department, this is real. Nobody has challenged the validity of the evidence that's been presented in the book. But there are a lot of interests that would like us to go away, would like this not to be, the American public not to know about this so that they can control our elections into the future. And so it's really up to the American people to take their democracy back, to say, hey, we want you to do something about this. And I urge people to read the book, examine the evidence for themselves, and then to express their, the fact that they want the Trump administration and elected officials to do something about this. There should be hearings, there should be, open debate, whatever, I don't care. But this is an existential threat to our system.
I do think quite a few people are thinking that if this was real and this important, that CNN would have told us. So it must not be true, that type of thing. But I think that thinking is going away in the last few years.
Yeah.
There's been so many big things that CNN hasn't told us or have lied to us about.
We have, through people we know, and we've contacted everybody in the press. They all know about this, including some of the biggest podcasters, the people you would think were independent, and they don't want to touch it. Now, one of the reasons that they feel reluctant is because in 2023, Dominion sued Fox News in a very public lawsuit. At that point, the whistleblowers went to the Fox News lawyers, showed them the evidence, and offered to let them depose the witnesses. And Fox News declined. And they decided to settle with Dominion. What we want to know, and we have our suspicions, is where that money came from. Did it really come from Fox News? Why would Fox News pay $780 million settlement when they knew that they could win the case publicly? But they didn't. They decided to settle instead. That settlement scared off a lot of the media, because even when I was trying to get this book published, I had a publisher initially, and then the book was supposed to come out in October of 2024, just before the election. And at the last minute, when the books were bound and the publicity was going out and so on and so forth, the publisher pulled the book and said, "Oh, we can't put this out because we're going to get sued." Well, they knew that from the beginning when they first took on the book. So there's been a lot of manipulation going on behind the scenes. And even today, I've done interviews with TV stations and so on, and big shows, and they're super excited. They look at the evidence and they're like, "Oh my God, da 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 da." And then at the last minute, their lawyers say, no, you can't put this out because we'll get sued. And it's like, well, who's going to sue you? Dominion doesn't even exist anymore. The company was sold. They sold their assets to another company called Victory Vote, right? In a very strange, what we think is another part of the corporate shell game, right? So they knew that people were going to start coming after Dominion, so Dominion mysteriously sells off their assets to this other very much smaller company. It makes no sense. So the Justice Department is currently looking into that sale because it's very suspicious. But the whole thing is really designed to confuse people and to make them feel as though, oh no, this is all nonsense. It's not real. But it is real. And read the book. The evidence is there, and there's a lot more evidence.
So I have a bunch of names of people who also speak out about this. I want to get your opinion. Gary Bernstein is one. You worked closely with him, right?
Yeah. Well, Gary. So what happened was in the spring of 2024, I live in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine from the DEA was visiting, and he said, "I want you to meet a friend of mine." He's the most interesting man. He's the greatest source DEA has ever had. And I ended up going to lunch with him, with Gary's partner, Martine Rodil. And Martine showed me the presentation that they had put together, which is like 4+ hours of slides and documentation. At the end of it, I was like blown away. And I mean, like a lot of people felt that very suspicious about the results of some of our elections. And this like proved the case. And I basically said, what do you want me to do? I'll help you guys, however you want. And they asked me to write a book. And that's how I got involved.
And then Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn, they were clued in pretty early on this, it sounds like. And I don't know about Emerald Robinson, too.
Yeah, I think Sidney Powell is, yeah, she was clued in 2000, and she tried to help Gary and Martine. But like I said before, they were just at the beginning. She was under tremendous pressure, and they were just at the beginning of their investigation. So there was kind of a little bit of a disconnect there. Emerald Robinson, she's a friend of ours, but she's also, there's also been a lot of misinformation involved there. Patrick Byrne, he's been a tremendous help, but I think some of the stuff that he said is not accurate. They're good in that they point a direction, that they point a focus on this, but some of the information that they have, I don't know. I can't verify at all.
Do you think there's a lot of good momentum right now to at least clean up the poll books between now and the elections in 26? That we're getting rid of dead people and that type of thing?
Yeah, there are tremendous amounts of efforts all over the country from different citizen groups and groups, lawyers and so on, that are focused on this. I don't, that all of them, I've spoken to a bunch of them, and they all run into roadblocks all the time from judges and county officials. Like I said, this is $1 billion system, and a lot of people want to keep it in place.
You do think that a lot of people in the Trump administration still, as of today, are actually working against this, against him cleaning things up? They're working against Trump?
There are some. And a lot of people have been, a lot of people have worked with the criminal cartel. Let me put it that way: with the criminal cartel, the Cartel del Solis. They've represented them as lawyers. They've looked out for their interests in one way or the other. So when we point the finger at the cartel also being involved in election fraud, they get very uncomfortable, and they don't want to engage in that, right? And any exploration of that. And there are those people that are the people in the White House. I mean, Trump did take out Maduro and his wife, which was a good first step, but the system is still in place. The Cartel del Solis is still running. Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the interim president of Venezuela, is a member. Her and her brother are top players in the cartel. So, it remains to be seen how much further they go with the Trump administration.
Okay, we're running up to the end of our hour here. Any other points you want to make before we go ahead?
I would just say another like unmentioned SEPs before. Well, one of the heads of SEPs before, like I forget when he resigned, but Marco Rubio. was involved with steps, as were other Republican leaders and as were Democratic leaders. So, there are a lot of things here that need to be further investigated, and we've got to find out, who, how compromised some of these people are. Were they really working? Did they know what they were part of? Were they really working in the interests of the United States? And one huge embarrassing thing is that when all these other countries around the world realized that the United States had pressured them, had lobbied them to adopt compromised voting technology, they're going to be pissed, and rightfully so.
Okay. On that note, I think we'll finish up. But thanks a ton for all of what you have been doing. I really have enjoyed reading your work. Thank you, Ralph Pezzullo.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you for helping to, disseminate this information to the public.